My name is Daniel Royce. And if you've ever stepped foot in the world of architecture publishing, you've walked through a door I once held open. For 27 years, I was the soul behind Weston and Drake Media, a company that stood for something when everything else bowed to the algorithm. They called us the last bastion of human taste. Until they didn't, I remember the day it shifted. Not all at once. No collapse. No sirens. Just a quiet shuffling of chairs in the boardroom. Fresh faces with tech backgrounds and designer suits. Hunfren, Kitschus, consultants. And then came Nora Chase. The second short, Bisher's Shouting. Sharp mind, sharper heels. Hired as CEO to future-proof the business. Her first line to me wasn't hello. It was, tell me why you're still using notebooks. She saw tradition as an infection. I saw it as our compass. But I didn't protest. Not outwardly. I kept showing up. I kept building relationships with the editors, the contributors, the legacy clients. I curated stories that data couldn't understand, the homes that spoke poetry, the architects who built hope into corners, and the cultures that used stone like scripture. But none of it fit on a slide deck. To them, it did you. I was the past, and they had a plan. At first, they trimmed around me, fewer speaking engagements, less input on new issues. Then came the reorg of 101. Whole departments shuttered, veterans let go. And me, I was transitioned, not fired. That would mean confrontation. I was made irrelevant. Meetings rescheduled without me. My client accounts moved under digital experience teams. The final blow came in a hotel conference room in Chicago. We appreciate your years of contribution. Daniel, but it's time we embrace a more scalable leadership model. It was a velvet knife. Delivered by people who never even walked a construction site. I shook hands. I thanked them. I walked out with a smile stitched on my face. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I had learned something long ago. If you're going to be erased, remember everything. So I remembered every client call, every note, every silent betrayal, every architecture student who told me my magazine gave them purpose, every lunch where I swore I'd never go digital first if it meant cutting corners on soul. I remembered it all because revenge isn't about rage. It's about recall. For 3 months, I disappeared. Everyone thought I had taken early retirement. Even my neighbors started treating me like I was fading into the soft blur of old photographs. But what I was doing was listening. Calls came, quiet ones. Daniel, we miss the old way. Daniel, they're not listening to us. Daniel, can you recommend a new platform for indie submissions? One call turned into 20, then 50. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was gathering momentum. I rented a warehouse, not a sleek office with glass walls. A warehouse, in the Bronx. The same neighborhood where my grandfather mixed cement by hand and told me, a home isn't made of bricks. It's made of stories. I hired 2 people, no titles. Just trust. A brilliant misfit named Arjun who knew how to build digital systems without killing spirit. And Rosa, a former layout editor with hands like truth. Together, we began building something that didn't need a name yet, but it had a mission. To bring back soul to an industry that traded it for speed. No investors, no venture capital, just reputation equity. I reached out to 3 architects I trusted most. I told them I wasn't launching a company. I was launching a philosophy. One where publishers and creatives weren't cogs. They were craftsmen. They said yes before I finished the pitch. And then the name came to me. The Guild. Not a business, a brotherhood, a movement. Within 6 months, the Guild had a wait list. We weren't selling ad impressions. We were curating moments. And people noticed. The same clients Nora sent cold emails to started asking if I was back. Where is Daniel Royce now? They whispered my name like a legend. Not because I was loud, but because I outlived their forgetfulness. Nora tried to pivot. New initiatives, digital first blitz campaigns, a partnership with an influencer agency that knew nothing about blueprints. Revenue dipped, then tanked. And then it happened. One of Weston and Drake's oldest clients publicly canceled their contract and announced they were joining the Guild. It made headlines. Suddenly, we weren't a whisper. We were thunder. And just like that, the suit started calling. Daniel, there was to let's talk. Would you consider an acquisition? We admire your authenticity, but you can't buy back what you tried to kill. They didn't understand. I wasn't competing with them. I was replacing them. And it wasn't just me. The guild grew into a collective of creatives who'd been pushed aside for being too principled, too analog, too emotional. Thus, turns out, those were the very traits the world was starving for. I didn't give speeches. I didn't post manifestos. I just kept building. Now, we publish less, but it means more. We launch fewer projects, but they last longer. We teach students that the future isn't made by breaking everything. Sometimes, it's built by remembering what never stopped working. People think revenge is a fire, but fire dies. Revenge, real revenge, is a structure. It's a cathedral built stone by stone, with quiet hands and a patient heart. And when it's done, it stands taller than anything the suits could have imagined. So, if they ever tell you your methods are outdated, step back and build the future they can't see coming. Because revenge isn't loud. It's organized. The next morning, I arrived at the Guild's new satellite studio in Detroit, an old manufacturing plant turned creative hub, and walked past 6 desks filled with editors, researchers, and young interns who didn't know how close they'd come to inheriting a world without dignity. Rosa handed me a stack of manuscripts and a cup of coffee laced with cinnamon. She never forgot the details. Neither did I. Arjun pulled me aside. We just got an inquiry from the National Urbanist Society. They want us to curate a digital exhibit for their annual showcase. Theme, we redeem, when buildings speak. Want it? I nodded slowly. Only if we can make them sing. That's how we worked. Not for spectacle, for substance. A few weeks later, while preparing the exhibit, we received a package, unmarked, inside, a Weston and Drake annual report. Someone had highlighted a section in red ink. Client churn exceeds 40% in the legacy portfolio. I didn't smile, not even inside, because some victories are too solemn to celebrate. They're not wins. They're warnings. But the note inside it, that did make me pause. It said, they hired me to digitize the soul. Instead, I found yours. I'm ready if you are. Sir Evan. I remembered Evan, junior analyst, always asking the right questions, the ones that made Nora frown. We brought him in quietly the following week, and he didn't disappoint. He didn't bring just skills. He brought conscience. We were no longer a movement. We were a force, and they could feel it. So could we? We were proving that you can disrupt without destruction. That excellence wasn't something you scale. It was something you shepherd. That trust still matters. And that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't hungry for faster. It was hungry for real. Then came the call I never expected. Harold Graham, former chairman of Weston and Drake. He'd been silent through it all, quietly retired after Nora was brought in. After the buyout that turned a mission-driven company into a portfolio line item, he asked to meet her. We met at a bookstore. One of those few still left with creaky wooden floors and dust that smelled like thought. He was thinner than I remembered. Older but his eyes were sharp. I owe you an apology. Daniel, I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. Harold. You just did what the board asked. He said. I did less. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. You know why they chose Nora? Because she promised acceleration. But none of us asked. Toward what? We just liked the sound of motion. He pulled something from his coat pocket. An old first edition issue of Lines and Lives. The magazine I curated for 14 years. I kept this, he said, because it reminded me that we used to stand for something. I took the magazine and turned the pages slowly. There it was. The story of a Syrian-born mason rebuilding homes in Detroit from salvaged limestone. The photos, the ink, even the font, every element was a rebellion against forgetfulness. Harold looked at me with the weight of history in his gaze. You brought dignity to an industry. We replaced you with dashboards. And now we're bleeding out. So why now? I asked. He sighed. Because they're preparing to sell the company, and the only viable pitch left to investors is this. We're going back to our roots. Again, there it was. Full circle. They wanted my legacy to save their future. I put the magazine down and stood up. You don't need me to do that, Harold. You need to remember how to listen to people who don't shout. You need to trust people who build slow. And you need to stop confusing leadership with velocity. He nodded, tears gathering but never falling. I left the bookstore not with vindication, but with clarity. The war was never against Nora, or the suits, or or the board. It was against forgetfulness. And now that I remembered everything, I had one final chapter to build. 2 months later, the Guild hosted its first national summit, not in a convention center, in a repurposed rail depot in Singing. Architects, designers, editors, students, 900 people, no sponsors, no product booths, just minds, stories, and real conversations. I opened the summit with one line. They tried to scale what was meant to be sacred, and the room went silent. I shared the truth, not just my journey, the industries, the moments we all let convenience bully craftsmanship, the times we said yes to speed because we were too tired to fight for soul, and how we'd all paid for it, in meaning, in momentum, in legacy. But then I showed them what we could build instead. Rosa presented the new Guild Journal hand-stitched covers, stories sourced from 5 continents, every word chosen like a stone in a sacred wall. Arjun unveiled the digital museum we built with the National Urbanist Society. Evan shared a database of independent publishers and creators that rivaled any algorithm in reach, but not in compromise. That night, I sat on the roof of the depot watching the city lights flicker like quiet applause. And I knew this wasn't revenge anymore. This was restoration. And I wasn't just rebuilding a company. I was healing an industry. One decision, one story, one movement at a time. There was a woman who came up to me after the summit. She looked barely 30, eyes filled with equal parts exhaustion and ambition. She held a copy of the first Guild Journal against her chest like armor. Her name was Camille, and she said something I haven't forgotten since. You reminded me why I started this. You made it feel sacred again. It wasn't flattery. It was relief. There's a kind of despair that creeps in when meaning disappears. When your work becomes content, your craft becomes a KPI, your story becomes a scroll. I knew that despair, and I knew it could be reversed. The next 6 months became a masterclass in quiet insurgency. We didn't scream louder. We created deeper workshops, residencies, collaborations that didn't chase trends but rediscovered roots. We introduced a mentorship program where legacy editors paired with self-published authors, cross-generational, cross-cultural, cross every line the industry had drawn. One day I asked Rosa what it felt like watching all this grow. She smiled, small and fierce, like planting in soil they swore was dead. And the more we grew, the more others noticed. Universities began to call. Would the Guild guest curate their semester capstones? Would we review portfolios? Would we teach? We said yes, but not as guests. We became partners. We were rewriting the curriculum as we rebuilt the canon. Meanwhile, Weston and Drake attempted to salvage their brand with rebranding campaigns, podcasts, partnerships with influencers who couldn't pronounce the names of the architects they referenced. Their metrics plummeted. But what hurt them most wasn't the numbers. It was the silence. Clients stopped calling. Students stopped quoting them. Their relevance didn't collapse in a bang. It dissolved like mist. And then came the final pivot. Nora Chase resigned. No announcement. Just a quiet memo, leaked to the trades. And 2 days later, I received an email from the new interim director. Polite, professional, almost reverent. Would I consider a conversation? Just a conversation. I didn't reply. Because some conversations aren't held in boardrooms. They're held in results. We didn't need Weston and Drake's permission to thrive. We needed their absence to prove what happened when vision wasn't compromised by scale. And so we kept building. The second summit was in Portland. The third, in Oaxaca. We translated our journal into 6 languages. The Guild became not just a platform, but a philosophy adopted in disciplines beyond architecture. Culinary collectives, literary houses, educational startups. People weren't copying our model. They were following our principles. And here's the truth I learned. The world will always try to flatten you into a version of what sells. It will offer you comfort if you surrender meaning, speed if you forget memory, applause if you agree to be forgettable. But the ones who change everything are the ones who refuse, not with fury, but with faith, not with rebellion, but with return. I was never trying to beat the suits. I was trying to remember who we were before we put them on. And in that memory, I found something more powerful than any resignation, acquisition, or headline. I found peace and a legacy no one could kill. The first snowfall of winter arrived on the morning the Guild published its 100th feature, a small milestone by corporate standards. But to us, it meant something. Not because of the number, because of the name. The feature was about a man named Luis Herrera, an undocumented carpenter who'd spent 17 years anonymously repairing homes destroyed by hurricanes across the Gulf Coast. No website, no business card, no bank account, just hands hardened by devotion and a quiet oath to leave every place better than he found it. Luis reminded me of what I once was before all the titles. Before they called me executive editor, before they wrote CEO on my door, back when I was just a man with a pen, and a heart that ached when stories went untold. That feature exploded. It didn't trend. It transformed. Schools started fundraising for Luis. Clients offered him full contracts. The mayor of Baton Rouge honored him with a citation he humbly declined. He came to visit us later that month. He didn't speak English, but Rosa translated, "You didn't just write about me." He said, "You remembered I exist." And that, in the end, was the point. The Guild wasn't created to fight an industry. It was built to remember people. That winter, we opened our fellowship program. We selected 12 emerging creators from across the globe. They came from Nairobi, Nova Scotia, São Paulo, and New Orleans. None of them had resumes that would have passed through the corporate filters, but their work, it thundered with truth. We gave them mentors, not managers, deadlines, flexible, budgets modest, expectations, soul deep, and they delivered certain, not because we pressured them, but because we trusted them. That's the secret the suits never understood. People don't create greatness because they're micromanaged. They do it when they feel seen. 6 months later, the Guild was invited to speak at the International Creators Forum in Berlin. Rosa went. She stood on that stage, trembling but unshakable, and said this, "You want innovation? Start by protecting memory. Because when we forget who we are, we become easy to replace." Thunderous applause. That night, she called me and said, "Daniel, we didn't just survive. We started something sacred." She was right. Because there's something deeper than success. It's significance. It's knowing that even after you're gone, something you built still holds, still shelters, still sings. That spring, I walked past Weston and Drake's former offices. They were empty. No one. For lease, faded logo barely visible behind the dust streaked glass. I stood there, not in triumph, but in prayer, because it reminded me the world changes fast, but the truth doesn't expire. It waits, it endures, and eventually, it reclaims its place. So let them try to erase you. Let them hire suits, hold meetings, design strategies. Let them replace your legacy with systems, your name with roles, your craft with campaigns. Because one day, they will remember. Not who you were, but what you built. And when they do, they won't whisper your name. They will stand in what you made, in the light of a movement they didn't see coming. Because revenge isn't loud. It isn't fury. It isn't fire. It's stone, quiet, precision, unshakable. And sacred.